Hey, Adam, and hey, anyone who may one day be listening. So the story behind this call is that Adam is an old client of mine and I was a member of the Coach's Journey group program. And he messaged me a few weeks ago or a couple of weeks ago saying, because he's in the process of setting up a new podcast, and asked if we could jump on a call and I could answer some questions. And for some reason I thought, well, instead of that, why don't we record it in case it's a great podcast episode that I can put out one day, just because, partly because I think it's really good to share this stuff so that we don't have to all learn everything from scratch. And also because it'll be interesting to just capture where I am with my thinking about the podcast at the moment. And also because Adam is a great coach and will ask me some great questions. And also because no one ever invites me onto their podcasts. And so I have to get people to interview me potentially on my podcast. But so Adam, I don't know if you want to, for me, it'd be quite useful before we dive in. I know you've got some great questions. A little bit about the podcast you're setting up and where you are with it, so that I can. And I should also say, like, I've recorded like 11 episodes of a podcast, and I've got no idea if it's doing what I wanted to do and all that kind of thing. So it definitely still feels like early days, and I'm not sure that I'll have awesomely great answers to your questions, but let's play. That's probably what this is probably what every guest of every podcast ever thinks in their mind.
Yeah, so why did I choose you, Robbie? Because I've listened to every episode of the podcast that you've done to date and been absolutely blown away by what you've produced. So yeah, that was my reason. I could have picked up the phone to a number of people that I know have done podcasts recently, and I didn't. I chose you because of the quality of content and the people that you have worked with. So yeah, doing yourself an injustice big time. So yeah, I've slightly different for me. I'm actually going to be working with another coach, high level or previous high level sports athlete in the hockey world. Has played national hockey for England when she was younger, and our paths have crossed by this organisation called Mums in Business, which I support quite heavily. And Kerry and I just struck up a relationship and started talking about the people that we work with, the work that we do. And one common thread that we both feel as though we work on quite regularly is this topic of confidence. Where does it come from? What is it? Where does it show up in your life? How does it show up? How do you get more of it? And that kind of general theme of people, oftentimes they bring, as you know, Robbie, they bring something to the table. And what we've both found, Kerry and I, is that there seems to always be somewhere in the relationship of the work that we do something around confidence. So we thought, hey, like, how can we support that community of people? Yeah, of course we can do work with people, and that's what we do. But how could we create something that might be able to answer some questions for people so that they don't feel as though it's just me? Because oftentimes the client that's sat in front of me it's just me that's feeling like this. And I find it a really fascinating topic when you really start to think about it. Like, what is it? Where does it come from? Is it situational? Is it random? And all these kind of fascinating questions. So that's just a little bit of background about how Kerry and I have come to the conclusion, actually, we'd like to create a podcast all around the theme of confidence. And we're both fairly fortunate with our networks. So we've got an idea of some guests of different varieties, Robbie. I'm fortunate enough, Royal Marine Commando, for argument's sake, who's done a number of tours in Afghan. He's a confident guy, you think. Kerry's got a number of high-level sports athletes that she's worked with one-on-one, teams, individuals, all those sorts of different dynamics around confidence. So we're fairly fortunate that we've got a network that we perceive at this moment in time that we can pull some strings on, and that people would be willing to come and talk to us. But neither of us have produced a podcast. And I was intrigued and very excited when you said you were doing one. Having done work with you last year for 6 months, I knew the quality and content and the speakers that you would, the guests that you would have would be of a certain caliber, and you've not let us down in any way, shape or form. So yeah, rabbited a bit there. I'll give you enough background about how we've got to where we've got to and the topic that we've come to as well.
Yeah, and so just so I can, because there's already a really interesting difference in there if there's going to be two of you. Is the idea that it'll be two of you interviewing one guest,
Yeah.
at least initially?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay,
Which
really
is
interesting.
a little bit different. It's a different dynamic there to have 3 people on the podcast instead of just your regular 2. And we both bring something different from our backgrounds. So my background, as you know, nuclear operational background, and then more a strategic role in a corporate. And then Kerry's sports, very heavily sports background, Loughborough University type, actually playing high level sports as an athlete herself. So the two is, we've got quite a broad spectrum of experiences together, and our coaching as well. But the common thing that we found that's brought us together is this thing called confidence.
Nice. And yeah, I don't know, there's something already interesting about that different format, isn't there? Because it's a bit magazine show, because there's 2 of you who people will get to know, and there's also a bit of interview. So that'll be really interesting. But yeah, look, Adam, how can I help? What are you interested in?
I just for, if you are watching this, I did send Robbie like a list like this. I thought, if I'm going to ask, I may as well ask. So I guess first out the gates would be a more kind of classic question, which would be like, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?
I mean, look, there's a part of me that says nothing really. Like, it's been fine. It's been good. My attitude for things generally, which you probably know about me, is to do the minimum, is to do the 80-20 on everything, right? So I haven't done too much stuff in this that has felt unnecessary. One thing I think at one point, which was wearing me down, was I did what I think is a really sensible thing. So by the way, I should say I like Tim Ferriss. You can probably tell that by the fact that my podcasts are also meandering 2-hour monstrosities with unexpected changes of topic at unexpected moments. But I really like him. I like the way he analyzes the world. And he has done some great work to write about how to make a podcast and speak about that and that kind of thing. So I did one of the things I think I originally heard from him, but I've used before. I basically decided that I couldn't just record one initially, because then I'd probably quit, because it would feel uncomfortable and vulnerable. So I aimed to record 5, but I actually recorded 7 before the first one came out.
Okay.
Now that was great, because it meant I had this whole set of content, which I then got to release, and I started from fortnightly. The downside of it was that I did all the conversations up front, and right, I'm a professional conversationalist. So that is the bit that is the most fun part of it.
Yeah.
And then what I had then, so I had like 7 conversations of mixed fun and ease, because you're learning it. And it's not the same as coaching, although it's similar. And then I had to edit 7. And the editing is less fun. It's not fun for me, but it is, the way that I do it is time consuming. And well, not time consuming, but it's one of your other questions, great questions. What's the most time consuming bit, I think? And for me, that has been it. Now I can talk a bit about what I do when I'm editing them, because the aim is to be minimal. But I think there was a kind of slightly tiring energy from having no conversations and only the mechanical sharing of conversations, the editing and the marketing. Like, so don't have so much. I wouldn't have had so much just recording, just releasing. It's like overlap them a little bit somehow. The possible thing that I would have done, which is an interesting one for you to think about, is I don't really outsource any of my work as a business person. Now, it's possible that at some point I will want to do that, but I have regularly thought about it with my coaching and decided not to, for all kinds of reasons, which are all good reasons. Now, outsourcing a chunk of a podcast is an obvious thing that could be outsourced, right? You could outsource everything from the recording. onwards quite easily with, after you've done it a couple of episodes, minimal supervision for somebody who is competent and or is interested in what you're doing. There's a problem with starting not doing that. If you're someone like me who likes to do the writing, quite likes the copywriting, who likes having the creative control over their work, then once you've started editing and you've started copywriting, it's a bigger thing to then give that away.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the wrong thing to do, because it might be exactly right for me to set the tone of what they sound like and what the marketing of the website looks like and reads like, and then give it to somebody else at some point in the future. But it would be something to think about. Do you just want to, at this stage, have someone who, you could do it anything from Fiverr, where you get some super swish Czech teenager to do it for you. Like, I don't know if they exist, but they might, for a relatively affordable amount of money, or not. And I think that's something that I might have done differently.
Nice. So let me just get this right, Robbie. So I've got it. You identified 7 people. You did all the recordings pretty much over a period of time, and then you had a bulk of 7 recordings that you then went to work on.
Yeah, and I think generally it's quite a good idea to chunk the recording and a bit. But I just think at the start with the project, what you've got to think about is, if you want to keep it going, or what I think I need to think about is, if I want to keep a project going, it can't be draining me of energy too much.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a bit of a risk. It coincided with some other stuff in life as well, so it's hard to separate all that. But there's a risk that by recording loads up front and then only having the more mechanical bits, I would have run out of energy and gone, I can't do this forever. Whereas I suspect that recording in a more manageable way, which in the long term, if I kept a fortnightly pattern, it means recording 2 a month, right? And then editing 2 a month. And that's not the same as trying to edit 3 in a month, or you get the conversations and the energy from that and the fun from that, as well as the other bits. What else might I have done differently? I think other stuff will come up as we go into the other questions. So let's see what else happens and come back to that one at the end, maybe.
You kind of answered the next one, which is, what's the most time-consuming aspect? And for you, that's been the editing.
So let me tell you a tiny bit about what the actual editing I do, because it's minimal, and I probably could. Here's another thing you could do differently. Don't do any editing. So I decided to do a minimal edit of every episode, which essentially means I listen through it once. I clear up the background and a few yeses and ums and me laughing quietly to myself. So you can't, it's so funny. I did it a minute ago. Laugh so quietly because you're trying to stay quiet, but it's loud enough that people can hear it on the recording, but not so loud as to be an actual laugh. So you can take them out and clean the whole thing up a little bit. And that takes surprisingly longer than you would think it would take. So it probably takes, if there was a 90-minute call, it's probably another 3 hours of work that I spend. Not always, right? Because it depends what you're doing. But by the time you've done the little bit of work to put the music in the right place, gone through it, cleaned up those bits of sound. Occasionally stuff needs cutting or editing if people's internet cuts out in the middle or something like that. Now, the reason that what I also do when I'm doing that, so this may also be why it takes a while, is that I also pull out all the things that need linking to.
Yes.
So I provide, now here's a thing you might want to just not do. For every episode, again, borrowed from Ferris, but he's almost certainly outsourced this to India. He has a list of all the links to all the important stuff that's been spoken about. Now, I think that is super useful, but I don't use it that much when I'm listening to other people's podcasts. So it may be that I'm just doing work that no one needs or is interested in. So I pull that out, and then but the thing that actually is useful when I'm doing it is I capture much better on a second listen the points of interest, like the really good bits. And that's then what goes into the audio intro that I do, which is the last thing I do. And then the copy, the marketing copy, the website content and that kind of thing. So unless you're giving all that away, there's some re-listen of the episode and note-taking that needs to happen anyway.
Yeah.
And I quite like that. Like, I don't like the idea that I would have one of these conversations and then essentially never listen to it again.
Yeah.
It feels nice to do another listen and a reflect and all that kind of thing and absorb it a little bit more. But that is all between it quite time consuming. Like, my intuition is that the whole thing for an episode of my podcast, probably I could do in a day.
Yeah.
So if I recorded at 10, let's say a 2-hour call, then had lunch, and then between 1 and 6, I could probably just about edit it, write the copy, and release it. The other thing that goes in there, so decisions to be made, I decided to essentially split my brand around this podcast.
Yes.
Right? There's a new website. There's a separate mailing list. So that's a decision. I decided to have a mailing list, which I send an email to each time a podcast episode comes out.
Mm.
I can talk about why I thought that might be an interesting thing to do. But in short, it's because the coach's journey as a business separate to which is essentially now my work with coaches, separate to my work with non-coaches.
Yes.
Like, it might be really useful for me. Like, in the end, I'm sharing too much content for coaches with non-coaches.
Yeah.
If I keep creating content for coaches, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so it felt, that's why I did it. You may not have that same thing, and it is just an extra piece of work. It doesn't take massive amount of time, but every 20-minute piece of work that you add in around something like this, it makes that time-consuming bit, which I call marketing or whatever, that bit longer.
Fabulous. So,
what are you thinking then?
Like just a couple of techie bits, really.
Yeah.
Which I'll leave to the end because they seemed more tactical. But actually, now we're talking about editing. What do you actually use? Like, can you talk me through the process? Because I'm pretty sure you do it on Zoom. Because I've seen some of those episodes. But then, what do you use in terms of? Do you use any specific microphones, or what do you actually use to edit the call with? So I guess just the general techie stuff, Robbie, that's really useful.
Yeah. So again, lots of stuff borrowed from Ferriss. So I decided I felt massively relieved about about making a podcast when I read that Tim Ferriss had done his first 10 or 20 on Skype. I was like, oh, thank God.
Yes.
I can just do that. I don't have to go and meet people or work out how the hell to do that. And I know that Zoom records, so it's all good. And Zoom is much better for recording than a Skype recorder attached to Skype is. So I'm actually in a better position than Tim was when he was starting that thing. So I decided to do that because it just saved me. It's like, how do I save myself some effort and some worry and some stress and do it on Zoom? And now there are downsides to that because you've got to rely on other people's internet and other people's tech setup a bit more than you would if you were going to meet people, and then you could take everything you need and know that it would be good. And the first episode I recorded, like, woman who works online all the time, never has any internet problems, internet drops out like 16 times across the thing. So I had to learn how to edit. It was a shame that was the first thing I had to do. But it both relieved me from a point of view of being a podcast editor, and terrified me as a consumer of audio content, how easy it was to edit stuff together. There was one bit where I essentially edited myself together mid-joke. Nice. And basically, I doubt people noticed unless I told them. And I did that. That was the first thing that I ever edited. And I had to do it because it was a half-decent joke. It wasn't really a good joke, but it was a half-decent joke. And her internet cut out just after it, I think. And so I tried to recreate the joke, but it didn't work putting it together. I hadn't managed to do it. So I had to edit mid-sentence. And you can do it, which is worrying if we think about what we take as being true. Anyway, so I record on Zoom. one of the things I learned, there is a good couple of Tim Ferriss posts, articles about it, about his setup and tips, which are worth checking out. One of the things was a video there from another guy, which is really good, about how to do it. And so on Zoom, what's really nice is you can split the audio. So if you're going to do some audio editing, it's really good. And Zoom can do this. You just change the setting to have a separate audio file for each of us. Because then if there's like a bang in the background here, or I realize I've left my washing machine on or something, I can fade myself down while you're speaking without there being a disruption. Whereas if you only have one audio file, you can only fade the whole thing up.
Everybody.
Now, a way to force yourself to not be able to do much editing would be not record separate audio files. So like, I'm not sure that is, if you want to make it sound a bit more professional, it's having the separate audio files to enable you to, or like when I take a drink of water while you're talking, instead of having a gulp, because I happen to be near the thing, just edit out the gulp. I did buy some tech kit. I bought this microphone. Which I think is actually the one that Tim recommends there's a page. Now you could buy a different one. I then found out, my friend Joel, who was a guest on the podcast as well, he has a podcast, and he told me afterwards, I asked him, but he didn't reply to my emails in time, so I bought this one. But he had a slightly different one, and his sounds great too. So I think I think this one cost about 80 quid. So I think spending, I think his one, when I looked it up, cost about 60. So he cost me 20 quid by not replying to my email. But spending 60 to 100 quid on a mic is worth it. When I checked it against that other headset that you'll recognize from the calls that we did, it's like only when I heard them next to each other, or I had a test call with my sister, and she was like, "Oh wow, this one is way better than the other one. Like it just sounds a bit less robotic," was her words.
Nice.
So I would say do that. I use Audacity to edit, which is a free audio editing software. My understanding is if you've got a Mac, or someone has, then GarageBand is just as good or better than Audacity, and so that's good enough, definitely.
Super.
And the guy whose video, which I'll try and find and send to you, whose video I watched, he gives quite a detailed tips on GarageBand specifically. So I got my sister. So my sister is a DJ, so she's not an expert on this stuff for this kind of thing, but she knows more about it than me. So she came over, and we played with Audacity together. You wouldn't need to do that. You could just watch this guy, and he shows you how to do the things and some good setup stuff. But that video was really good for just meaning you don't have to learn something later. Like recording 2 audio tracks, for instance. I only knew that because I watched this guy.
You could do that, Robbie. So that's like
exactly
golden now. And I'm assuming it's fairly easy. I'll find it in the settings somewhere. That's just
exactly. It is. And if you can't find it, let me know or Google it. And then he also suggested, set up a template file with your intro or your outro or your little bit of music and stuff in there, so you can just drop the audio things in, move them around a bit, and that's definitely a good tip. And he also says, which is great advice, do a test call with someone. Now you and Kerry can do this together, right? So get everything ready, then do one, record it, edit it all the way through, so that you learn the 2 or 3 things that are just really useful. And then, so then my process is record it on Zoom. I usually do, this is totally unnecessary, I've done it a load of times. The one time I didn't do it, actually, I forgot to do, I had to pause the recording once I realized partway through I was only recording 1 audio track, and I was too in my head after realizing that to carry on with the interview. So I stopped it. So that it's like with a guy called Barry, and he was funny about it. But so that was the only time I didn't do what I've done in every other one, which is test it. So record a little bit, switch the recording off, go offline, check that it's all there and sounds okay, and come back, is what I've done with almost every guest. I didn't do it with Barry. That was the only time I'd forgotten to switch the dual recording on, because it was the first one after that first set, I think.
Interesting.
Then record it, then drop it in, and then basically I go through and you just learn it a bit. I like learning these kind of things a bit. It's my kind of, I don't know what it is about me, but I developed then a set of things that I'm doing when I'm editing and things that I'm not doing. And that is like, remove an annoying background noise, remove some but not all of the yeahs and ums from the listener, whoever that is. It's weird sometimes you remove one and the whole thing starts to sound weird, and it's really interesting to think about conversation dynamics. Like, even though someone doesn't directly respond to you saying yeah, if you take the yeah out, they just sound a bit weird. And it can be either person. If there was tech stuff that needed editing out, so if someone's audio goes really weird at one point or something like that, I took it out on the audio version. Although I've also, for those where the video wasn't enormously interrupted, I've also put the video out essentially as well, exactly as was.
Yeah.
And that means in some of them there's like jerky bits where it cuts for 5 seconds or something. And I think that is basically the tech stuff. Oh, and then the other thing to say about tech or back-end things is I made that website on Squarespace, and the Coach's Journey website. And Squarespace has good podcast integration in it.
Okay.
So there are other ways you can do it, but essentially on Squarespace, you can set it up quite easily. The way that podcasts work, who knew, is you get what's called an RSS feed.
Yeah.
And then you take that and you go to iTunes and you follow some instructions, and you go to Spotify and you follow some instructions, and you go to some other places and you follow some instructions, and you essentially give them that RSS feed, which is a URL. And then whenever you post a new thing to that RSS feed, it appears on iTunes and Spotify and Google Podcasts and all that stuff.
And the RSS feed comes from
wherever you're hosting your podcast.
Okay.
In my case, on Squarespace. Now if you Google it, you'll find there are some famous ones, other big ones that I don't know, which would also do the same thing. Because I knew I wanted to create a new website for the podcast and now the group program anyway, it made sense to host it there. If I was doing what you're doing, I might not want a whole nother website. Yeah. I might just want the podcast to appear on iTunes and Spotify and Google and not be bothered about it appearing anywhere else. In which case, there will be somewhere else you could host it. I've forgotten what they're called, where you would get that.
Still need the RSS feed. It's got to be hosted somewhere.
Yes, exactly. Now, one of the interesting things to think about is, do you want, because a lot of people don't have this. So because I'm on Squarespace, there's a page for each podcast episode, which is therefore what I link to, right? Whenever I'm linking to the podcast. I don't know what happens. Like, depending on where you host your podcast, you will or will not have that.
Yeah.
And if you want to have that anyway, you kind of might as well have it hosted somewhere. So you only put it in. So Squarespace I like, because I wanted a page.
Yeah.
Basically. I think I did. Just because I like it. It felt like when I thought about it, having somewhere to point everything, which people could then go from there to Spotify or iTunes or whatever, felt useful. And it's good for the website to kind of feel like stuff's going on there. Then it makes sense to host it somewhere where you just create that page and Spotify and everything gets the stuff from there. You know, if you were, God, I can't remember the name of one. There's one that some people I know use. Whatever those other hosting places are, it might be that if you use them, they will have a page for the episode, but it might not look on brand with everything else and that kind of thing. But that's a kind of decision that you just...
Yeah, we've got an interesting dynamic because we've both got different websites.
So you might want then, I don't know what's going to be called.
It would be nice to have one place that we send people from both of our websites.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what happens with my website now.
Yeah,
what used to be a link to a page on my website for the Coach's Journey, you now click that and you get the coachesjourney.com.
Yeah. So some great learning there for me in terms of I didn't realise, and that's exactly why I wanted to have this call, that you effectively host it somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
It makes sense now.
Imagine it's way better than that than if you had to upload it to iTunes and then upload it to Google Podcasts and then upload it to Spotify and then upload it to all these other little ones. So a lot of the smaller ones, this is worth saying actually. So I found a website which said like iTunes has, X% share of the podcast market, or Apple Podcasts it's now called. Google Podcasts has this. I listen to podcasts on Spotify because I don't have an iPhone, and because the podcast functionality on Spotify is amazing. Like you can go to a whole London Underground journey on it without it jerking or cutting you off, because it buffers so much, I guess. So I wanted to put it on there, but then there are lots of people who some people don't use any of those apps, and there are all these other podcast apps. Now a lot of them look at iTunes, I think, and get the data from there, is at least what I read. But there were a couple that I had to add things onto, but you don't want to have to be doing that every time, right?
Yeah, no.
You want to just put it somewhere and they all read it, and that's how it works, which is great. And then you just need to have a little think about whether you're going to host it on a site or on a kind of podcast specialist platform. You know, there's various different places you can do it. My sister's podcast was on a different one somewhere else. Yeah, but it's neat. The Squarespace one, as far as I haven't used the other ones. Yeah, but it's not. You know, there's a couple of things you have to copy paste, like the episode description. I have to copy it from my page into a different bit of Squarespace to make sure it ends up on iTunes and that kind of thing. But it's not a big deal, really. And then, the last technical thing is, here's a funny thing. Listen to this and make of it what you will. I don't know how much difference this makes, but on Tim's Guide to Podcasts, there's a cheap online thing that essentially does mastering for you. Okay. So it matches the audio across the episode and makes so that one bit isn't too much louder than another and that kind of thing. And I run it through that. It's free if you do less than 2 hours a month. If you do more than that, it costs like 10 quid a month or something to get 9 hours. So on a month like this one, I can use the free one. When I had to do 3 of them in January, I paid 10 quid or something, or 15 quid. That felt like I listened back to it and I couldn't hear it for sure. It felt like it was probably better. And I trusted that other people like Ferris's Guide were probably right. And it enabled me to not worry about needing to do extra stuff. It was like, okay, for 10 quid, I can be like 20% more confident that this sounds pro. Yeah. And people have said nice things about it, which I think is a mixture of the editing, my mic, and that probably is what makes it sound good. And that's called Auphonic, AU, and then Phonic. I decided to use that. And again, so you then have to take what you get from there and then put it into, upload it onto Squarespace, and then enter a few details like how long it is. And then you just post I just post the Squarespace page, and within sometimes minutes, sometimes an hour, it's up everywhere. And then I, at that point, send my message to my mailing list.
Nice. So, thank you. That's definitely answered the question around tech. Because I'd got down, how do we publish podcasts to iTunes, Spotify? You've answered that. You've answered what software do we use? So just thinking about the guests, what pre-prep, if any, do you provide to them?
I send them a 3-page information for guests document. Okay. So when I was inviting them, I told them a little bit about the podcast. And obviously the first few guests got something slightly different to the next few guests, because by the time the next few guests came around, there was a podcast. And that document has a bunch of stuff in it, including please, if you can, be somewhere with reliable internet and have headphones so that there isn't echo, because sometimes, so one of the things I noticed from earlier on when you're editing is, this is weird, Zoom does some kind of thing where it noise cancels on behalf, like live, to stop there being too much echo. So let me see if I can think of an example. Let's say I'm talking and you say, or you laugh, or you go, "Oh, Robbie, you're so right," mid me saying something. I can't remember which way around it is. One of us doesn't have headphones on. If I don't have headphones on, then when you say something, your sound comes out of my computer Zoom hears it, dampens my sound.
Right.
And so if I then want to later edit your laughter out of it, I get this weird thing with my voice where my voice will go.
Yeah.
So advise people to wear headphones. They
Yeah.
sometimes listen, and sometimes I push them on it, and sometimes I don't. And I ask people at that stage, if you've got a mic that is better than your device's normal mic, use it. Try and put people's minds at rest a little bit about the whole thing in that document. Tiny bit of chat about marketing, and then ask them a few specific questions to help me with the interview. And I can talk about any or all of that, and I can send you the thing as well, because it's there. What else is interesting about preparing the guests and that kind of thing?
So I'd put, what would be an absolute must from your perspective in terms of supporting the guest to be the very best they can be during that interview?
Yeah. I think the tech advice.
Yeah.
And also a bit like, we probably talked about this about coaching before, but tech leadership as well. Like, actually be ready to know what you're going to do when their internet goes, so that they're not then stressing out about it, and probably prep them for that. It's like contracting, like coaching, right? It's like,
absolutely,
just make sure that if their internet conks out or yours does, that doesn't then throw them for the rest of the interview. Not that happened particularly, but that was just something I thought about quite a lot. So there were two ways that I did that. Now, this is my style, and you may or may not choose to do this. So one is, my intention was always essentially to release as close to what happened in the conversation as possible with minimal editing. Because that's my thing, is kind of a bit messy and not, better out than never done,
Yeah.
And so that fits perfect. That's on brand for, my 12-minute blog and all that kind of stuff. And I was able to say that and say, look, so that's the plan. So don't worry about when I laugh in a weird way or you say something stupid. We're just going to put it out.
Yeah.
And doing that in advance with people in writing. And then when we got on the call before we said go, was one. And then another, and this is a tough one, but another was, I said, I gave them permission essentially to say no later. Now, this is tricky, and I've changed slightly how I do it. So here's a thing I've learned. I also now put a very heavy responsibility on the guest to think about what they essentially shouldn't be talking about on a podcast that could get anywhere.
Yeah.
I probably won't, right? You could say this at the start. It'll probably just be listened to by my mum and yours, but it's possible that it'll end up in front of, it's going to be in the world forever, potentially. Yeah. So they need to think about that, and take responsibility for it.
Yeah.
And I can also reassure them that, look, if something happens and you just suddenly realize afterwards you really shouldn't have said that, I can edit it and take it out.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's worth thinking about that a little bit. And then I also tell them we're going to start from your journey into coaching. That's what we'll do in the first part of the conversation. And I think that's a useful, and again, your format may be different, but that's a useful thing to do, because it's something people know how to talk about, and it enables people to get comfortable by telling their story. And most people are used to telling their story in some way.
Yeah.
And so it enables them to do that.
And did you provide within that document, did you just ad hoc, Robbie, on the conversation, or did you have something specific in mind, a set of questions that you religiously, even though it may not have come across on the podcast because it didn't feel like it did, but did you just we're going to talk about coaching, and wherever that takes us is wherever it's going to take us, and that's where the magic will be, basically. And that's what I saw, that's what I listened to, as I've listened to the Coach's Journey podcast, is it felt very natural. There didn't seem to be a great deal of structure around it.
Yeah, so both. The answer is both. I guess is a bit like, I guess I do treat it a bit like coaching.
Yeah.
What can I say about that? So I did crowdsource some questions, including from you, I think. At least some of the other guys in the group sent some questions in.
Yeah.
Because I was doing that just as we were finishing our work, I think. And I then had a document. I did have a document which has all those questions that people like you, some other old clients, some friends sent to me, broken down, what are the things you would like to hear other coaches talk about, and then broken down a bit by topic. So that exists. And then I didn't really think about, then I read that through before the first couple of interviews, and then I didn't really think about it.
Yeah.
And I still, when I recorded one that I hadn't recorded one for a while, I went back to that document, read it again a bit, tried to get a feel for what are people interested in.
Yeah.
Well, the brief that I gave them essentially was that there might be 3 acts to the podcast. And again, a lot of this is like me thinking about the podcasts I like and the Tim Ferriss show in particular, just because it felt like actually, if I just created the Tim Ferriss show, but just with coaches, that would be a really useful thing for the coaching industry to have. And then because it's going to be me and not Tim Ferriss, it's going to be my thing. And so the way I think about that is the first part of the interview is going to be talking to them about their journey.
Yes.
There's going to be a total free zone in the middle where anything can happen. And if we haven't got there, but often we have, the last bit is going to be like a lot of the questions that coaches wanted answered were real detailed, practical things. It's like, what does your engagement look like? What is your niche? How much do you charge? And what's the advice you would give to coaches who are just starting out or earlier in the path than you? And those are all great questions. And so if they haven't come in, the last bit is me going to that, at least in some way. And then I trusted that I'm going to interview a minimum 7 people. Over those 7 interviews aren't going to all be the same, although every coach is not going to hit. I didn't know this as articulately when I first started out, and I stressed about it much more than I sound like I am now. But where I am now is, and this is what I'd say to you, if you're going to interview 10 people, you don't need to ask every question of everyone, because you're going to end up asking every question of someone. And you're going to end up covering everything with someone. And so you can kind of relax around.
Yeah, I like that.
That bit. And other than that, the other thing is, and this is probably one of the bits of advice that I would give, is I mean, this is a confidence question, right? This is a confidence thing. So, it's the Littmanism, confidence is a result, not a requirement, right? So I knew intellectually that I would get better at interviewing people as time went on.
Yeah.
Now I know that, like, in an embodied way, because I have done interviewing people and got better at it. And so the advice would be accept that the first ones, you will get into a rhythm, especially the 2 of you. I would have thought that balance will evolve in a really nice way, but it will have to evolve to a certain extent.
It's going to be a bit bumpy, Robbie.
Definitely is. And
one of us might, I've got this great question. And
then by the time it gets there, Adam's banging on, it's gone. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I've got that same, I've never done this before. I can talk to people all day long, but there's a difference there. This is to share learning. It's to help people with a particular topic area. It's not just about talking as such. I want to make sure that the delivery of the actual content supports people's understanding of a fairly well-known issue that lots of people struggle with in various different areas of their life. So
and look, on that, you could do a load of work to work out what the right questions to ask would be. But if you get 10 people, one after the other, and you ask them what confidence means to them, you're going to get some great conversation out of that, and some interesting stuff for people who are interested. It is genuinely surprising the number of people who have reached out saying, it is just so, no matter how much I thought beforehand, the reason I'm making this is because I'm pretty sure it'll be really useful to a lot of people. The first time someone reaches out, or each time someone reaches out and says, this has been really useful, it's like, God, that's kind of still a bit of a surprise. Yeah.
Someone's listened to it.
Absolutely. But it was just me having a conversation with someone that I already know about coaching, which I enjoy doing. How can people have found that useful? And yet they do. That actually, let me just hit that one. I'm not sure this is the right way to go about it, but the people that I invited for the first round of interviews were people that I knew I would enjoy talking to.
Mm.
And I knew it wouldn't be stressful to talk to. And I knew they had interesting things to say. And the only one that I think might have, I could have invited people that I didn't know as well, where getting them on would be more of a challenge. And for all I knew, they might be less easy interviewees.
Yeah.
And that might be, for example, what I do next, or at some point in the future. For me to start off, I wanted to set myself up to succeed.
Yeah.
One of the things is, let's make something that I know will be useful, which is me talking to my current coach, the guy who ran the training that I did, somewhat, one of my favorite people that I've met on a group coaching program that I did. And that's the first 3 episodes. And, I knew those were going to be interesting conversations.
Yeah.
And so there's good and bad things about that. And there's been good and bad things. There's interesting things about the selection of guests is an interesting thing, and we could talk a bit more about that now. Sorry, also Adam, I'm aware of time. I've got time, but I just want to check if you've got time, if you need to move on.
So we've got like another 10 minutes, Robbie, easy. I'm fine.
Yeah, and we should say, if we do end up using this for anything, this is because you're on lockdown and you've got 2 boys somewhere else in the house, I imagine, who need it.
And it's coming up to our allowed out for exercise once a day time.
Nice. Don't want to miss that.
So having a 7 and 4-year-old who are chomping at the bit to get outside, we're all right. They'll be fine. They'll be absolutely fine.
So what's useful then, Adam, before we finish?
I think there's 2 things. You were just about to tell me about guests and picking guests. That is definitely on the list that I have. I sent over just in terms of your experience. I think you've articulated beautifully, setting yourself up to succeed with the first few with people you're very comfortable with, will have really interesting things to say around the topic area. What else around guests is worth Kerry and I considering?
People will say no. Like, surprising people might say no. Is one of the things I discovered. There's a couple of people that I had in my first kind of set of invites, and I just imagined that people would say yes because they knew me so well, all of these people really, and yet it's not just about, of course, it's not just about the podcast. It's about what people have got going on in their life. It's about how they want to run their business. It's about suspicion of podcasts. I don't know what I don't really know.
I'd not considered that, Robbie. I'm like, if you invite a guest on a podcast, of course they're going to want to talk.
But not everyone is a show off like you and I, Adam. That's the problem. It's like, but it did make me think. It's like, oh, okay, and there's a load of reasons why people might do that. And sorry, it's like some of the people that said no, that have said no to coming on, have said it for reasons that I completely understand, and some have said it for reasons I don't quite understand. But even they're probably really good reasons for them. But it was just kind of a bit of a surprise to me. And like any no you get as a human, you have to deal with your personal reaction to that no. So expecting a few people to say no. A thing I've learned more recently, there's a guest that I'd love to have on. I don't know if it'll actually happen. Who was recommended by another guest and pushed back really hard on the time that I was asking of them.
Okay.
So they were like, or their PA was like, I can do 25 minutes. She can do 25 minutes. And I was like, that's not this thing. Yeah. Like, no. I mean, like, if you can get 75 minutes so that we can make sure we get 60 minutes of conversation that we can use, then I'm up for that. But if not, then that's fine. And that's perfect. And I understand that people are really busy and have a lot on. So, but I would think, depending on particularly when you reach out beyond those people that you know, if you know, when you reach out beyond those people that you know believe in you in the way that, for instance, most of those first few guests did in me, who were just like, oh, this is a super cool idea. I definitely want to be on. I'd love to have a 2-hour conversation with you. One of the guests was like, oh, brilliant. I'm basically coming here to get free coaching. This is going to be ace. You know, it's like those people will probably say yes and make the time. And the people who are, you know, more successful in their businesses than me, who are in those notably more successful or further on in the journey, are people who, for different reasons, really buy into me. And so they were generous with their time at that point.
Yeah.
Thinking about what the minimum you ask of guests is probably interesting.
Yeah.
So for instance, in the document, there's also some questions I asked them. I say, I'd really like to be able to talk about these things, like how much you charge, how financially successful your business is, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But in that case, I give them permission to say no to that.
Yeah.
Because not everyone, money is a tricky thing to talk about, right? Especially in personal finance. And that's why I want to make a strong request to talk about it. But for me, that isn't a requirement for coming on the show. Yeah. Committing to having an open and frank conversation, knowing that it'll be shared, and giving the time so that we can get at least, I discovered with this one guest, at least 60 minutes, that was the lowest I was willing to go, were my requirements. And so it's worth thinking about that. And but make the ask that you want. Yeah. So I asked for 2.5 hours. Yeah. Because that enables us to have time for the tech to go wrong, time to say hi at the start, time to say bye at the end, and time to go to get a conversation that lasts between 60 and 120 minutes, which is what I decided was what I wanted to make, because that's what I like to listen to. Yeah. Anything else about guests?
No, I don't think so. I think what you've already shared across the last 45 minutes nearly has been exactly what I would have expected it to be. Yeah. And more. There's so much in there. And I'm glad we've recorded it, because I'm going to ask you for the recording, because
definitely.
There's so many little bits and pieces in there that, not just the software and the techie stuff, but asking permission, contracting, the time period, what's the minimum you would be willing to work with someone, accepting no's.
There's a couple of things that have just come into mind that I just think are worth actually pulling out. So one is, because you asked me a great question, you put a great question on that list, which I can't remember, like it was like, what are the must-dos if we're going to make this as good as we can? So
what would be your top 3 must-dos to ensure that the podcast could be the very best we could create?
Yeah, I think we've talked about 2 of those. So one is trust that it will improve and you will improve. Yeah. One is do that minimum check. So get some music that sounds good, minimum tech, get some music that sounds good, record 2 audio channels, spend 150 quid or whatever on a mic and whatever else it is that you need. And then the third one is, I think to make it the best podcast you can, you have to start from believing that making it is the end in itself. And you have to hold that. And whenever you get annoyed, whenever I get annoyed and frustrated with things about it, if I remember that I think it is a worthwhile thing to have created, that's useful. And the example of that, for example, is one of the things you could think about with guests, which I refuse to do because I refuse to be this cynical, but it's not necessarily that sensible, is pick people based on their marketing reach.
Yeah.
So for example, I made a call to not do that. Now that means that, we'd have to ask the guests. Some of them, I've seen them sharing and talking about it, but it happens to be that if you think about those first 5 guests, let's say, I don't know that, Minor does, I think, but I don't know if the other 4 have even a mailing list that they could send something like this to. And I don't even know if guests shared it with their friends on Facebook. Yeah. So at one point, I got really frustrated with that. I'm like, all I'm doing is giving a platform to these people who are then hearing from my people. Like, so my people that I know, who I'm connected to, I'm giving a platform to these guests to. And what am I getting in return? Yeah. And that's not that useful a mindset to have.
No.
I don't think.
No,
I'm not sure. You can tell I'm not sure about that. But
I'm with you there, Robbie.
I think I believe in just creating the thing for the sake of
Yeah.
creating it, if it's the right thing to be created.
That's where Kerry and I are. We've got a combined desire to try and support people around this topic that keeps coming up for both of us in the work that we do and that we support people with. And if we can help with that on a larger scale, then why would we not? If we can, then let's do it. For the sake of a couple of £100 for some tech and some time that we can both invest in it, and we've got a great network between us, then why not? Let's try and do that.
And also just remember that you can create. Podcasting is still a new medium, although there's a lot of them out there. One of the things I realized is, but I'm not too late to the table now. At first I thought I was, and I was like, no, it's fine. There's loads of space for more podcasts. But the other thing is, you can make up how it works. If I'm probably going to slow down how often they come out.
Yeah.
Now, for a while. And partly that's because I lost an interview because someone had to cancel because of coronavirus. So otherwise there would have been a good one to come out in April. But I'm probably going to slow them down. Or I might say season 1 is over and season 2 starts in the summer.
And Robbie, that's from the work that we did together. That, for me, and the work that we did is something that I hold still to this day, is that we have a choice on how we want to do these things. There's no hard and fast, bring one a month out for however long. We could do bi-monthly, we could go every month, we could do one a week. It's that whole piece for me is some of the biggest learning that I took from the work that we did, and the way we create it, what we create, how we create it is all within our gift.
Yeah.
And that's a great place to be operating from.
Yeah, and you should definitely bring that into this because, who knows what the successful format of the podcast is, if it's this one or the third podcast you or I make. And, I'm playing a bit with format at the moment. I've done one, which was just me. This might be a podcast episode. I just recorded the second one with Katie yesterday, about coaching during coronavirus. It's like, they're different. They're not the same thing. And who knows if actually what people want is just me rattling on about coaching for 2 hours every month. And I could do that. And that'd be actually easier than interviewing people or who knows, right?
Yeah.
So you can definitely play with all that stuff. And I think that, that's how I operate, but it's like, make something, see what happens. If you want to make some more of it, make some more of it. And